very beginning, I would like to underline that the paper I'm going to present is the result of the mutual work of Ewa Wipszycka and myself. The other thing is that you have a small booklet in which there is much material about the sources, about the chronology, about the names, so you may easily consult it. Not everything will be contained in the paper I'm presenting. So let me start. First, rather general introduction. Terminology must be the first issue to discuss. We put the word pilgrims in the title of the paper in accordance with the stereotypical view of the visitors frequenting pilgrimage sanctuaries. Yet, it is just a stylistic device, as we did not want to surprise listeners accustomed to this word. The term pilgrims causes numerous problems for the researchers of the great sanctuaries of antiquity. It was unknown in the languages used by the late antique Christians. In the literary text describing events taking place in such great sanctuaries, among the crowds of the faithful, pilgrims, that means people coming from far away, setting out on a journey with the intention of visiting holy sites, are not distinguished from those who came from the immediate vicinity of the sanctuary or visited it during trips undertaken for various reasons, meeting family, business, running errands. It is probable that those whom you would call pilgrims today experience their contact with the holy space differently, as they belong to different social groups. Long journeys required appropriate material means, unless the visitors belonged to a group of wandering ascetics, begging for accommodation and food, and we know that there were such people in antiquity. However, little do we know about such pilgrims in relation to Abu Mina and Philoxenita. Abu Mina is commonly called a healing sanctuary, which assumes that the predominant motive for visiting it was prayer for health. Sources, however, present us a more complex picture. Indeed, the Inventio miracle recorded in the encomium is healing. Other hagiographic texts inform us about healing in a general way, clearly indicating that they were the main impulse attracting pilgrims. We also find information about the healing properties of oil from a lamp burning on the tomb of the saint. I quote, "All who took away some of the oil of the lamp to distant lands received healing," end quote. The quotation is from the encomium. Therefore, we must be aware of the peculiar nature of the collections of miracles which, as it seems, were rather aimed at the local audience and were not originally intended to spread the fame of the saint in the world. It is clear from the miracle narratives that the saint was also asked for protection in situations and problems not associated with health at all. In the Greek and Coptic collections of the miracles of St. Minas, only one miracle, single miracle, is focused on healing, and even this one represents an inclusion of an external wandering material. Visitors from very distant lands, whose presence in Abu Mina is documented, could have simply asked for a safe return journey, for the well-being of their loved ones, or for favorable trade deals. The above said wandering miracle mentions the incubation taking place in the church. The protagonists of the story are the mute woman and the paralytic, to whom St. Minas revealed himself at night and ordered him to lie next to a sleeping woman. And when the paralytic managed to crawl up to her, the woman screamed out of fear, and the man, having regained his ability to move, fled. This story also appears among the miracles of Saint Cosmas and Damian, and in the miracles of Saint Cyrus and John, and about the Cyrus and John in both collections, Greek collection by Sophronius and independent Arabic collection. Archaeologists usually believe that the incubation in Abu Mina took place in a semicircular two-story building opening into a church complex with the tomb of the saint here. We have significant doubts whether this was the purpose of the structure. It could have been a xenodochion for important guests, also for the sick. The fact that there is no other mention of an incubation in Miracula seems to be an important clue in our view. Such healing practices did not occur in all pilgrimage sanctuaries. Obviously, the composers of the miracles choose themes which, in their opinion, furnished good illustration for the multifarious manifestations of the saint's power, without being bothered what was behind the motives of the average guests of the sanctuary. This statement is important when we proceed to identify individual buildings. Perhaps, for example, the extensive baths in Abu Mina might not have been a result of religious lavatory prescriptions, as Peter Grossman suggests. There are such bath complexes here and here, quite extensive. Miracula do not refer to ablutions as healing measure at all. We are in the circle of Mediterranean bath culture, where people are just used to bathing. One has had to be a monk to reject it. There were particularly numerous visits taking place on 3 holidays: the commemoration of the martyrdom of St. Minas at 15 Hathor, November 11, the commemoration of the inventio of their saints' relicts, and commemoration of consecrating the basilica. The sources differ in locating 2 last feasts in the calendar, but one of them was certainly on 15 Paone, June 9. The Patriarch of Alexandria and his entourage took part in the celebrations, at least during the most important festivity in November. Shenouda I did so even in the middle of the 9th century, before the persecution initiated by Ibn al-Muddabir led to Abu Mina, I quote the history of the Patriarchs now, the delight of all the Orthodox people of Egypt becoming a desert, end quote. We think the first step of the Patriarch's journey was Philoxenite and its magnificent basilica, where he probably officiated a service. And now a couple of words about the roads to Abu Mina. The miracles of St. Minas, wherever they go into detail about the road the visitors used to take to Abu Mina, recount crossing the lake, staying at Philoxenite, and traveling across a roughly 20-kilometer section of the desert. In the context of our meeting, it is worth gathering topographical information which could be extracted from the miracle collections. The first step, a boat trip from Alexandria to Philoxenite. So this strip. At the port of Alexandria, the boat was boarded during the morning meal, and the journey lasted all day, which probably means until dusk. In the miracle about the Samaritan woman, the protagonist arrives at Philoxenite in the evening. Miracula recount numerous boats staying at Philoxenite, as well as the details of the mooring maneuver. Obviously, the port at Philoxenite also handled cargo traffic, certainly not only local operations, but also the trade heading for Abu Mina. One of the miracles describes a deputation from Abu Mina which collects the wood donated to the sanctuary in Alexandria. Although no mention is made of the destination port to which this timber was dispatched, it was undoubtedly Philoxenite. The next step, Philoxenite itself, here, described as Maria. The encomium and some miracles, both Greek and Coptic, are the only sources that record the name Philoxenita. Since the author of Encomium is clearly aware of at least some traditions present in the miracles and is highly critical of them, the fact that he uses the name and gives an elaborated tradition about the founding of the town, what Professor Derda already mentioned, renders it highly probable that it was in fact the name the town bore, at least in the Byzantine period. However, the information about the town gathered in the miracles is very general in nature. Philoxenita features a marketplace, agora, the exact word is given. There are private lodgings in the town, manchoele in Coptic. Surprisingly, the church in Philoxenita is not mentioned in any miracle, though it must have been a major landmark for those arriving in the town by water. At the same time, it was a building of considerable size and certainly richly embellished. In Miracula, however, Philoxenita is merely a stop on the way mentioned in passing, not a stand-alone theme. In the Encomium, too, the passage about Philoxenita serves only to emphasize the importance of the sanctuary of St. Minas. The basilica in Philoxenita was by no means crucial for the authors of these works. The third step, Xenodochia along the way. Instead of stopping overnight at Philoxenita, travelers may have taken shelter in guest houses, Xenodochia, like a structure discovered on the road to Abomina at about 2 kilometers south of Philoxenita. There also existed Xenodochia located along the lake, however. The Greek miracle, recounting the story about the Samaritan woman, mentions a Xenodochium by the lake located midway between Philoxenita and Abomina. On the other hand, in the miracle about the Isaurian pilgrim, the Isaurian enjoys accidental hospitality in a private house because, as the text points out, the further journey led through uninhabited areas. So it cannot be referring here to the nearest vicinity of Philoxenita. The information that the house in which the Isaurian stayed was located near a lake, near the lake, and at the same time at a considerable distance from the port, may point to, for example, a settlement near the present-day village of Bachik, somewhere here. And the fourth step, Martyrium of Santikla. You have a much more detailed study about it among the materials you have got. This is the only this one is only mentioned in the miracle about the woman pilgrim called Sophia. It is the reference point for where the woman was assaulted along the road, namely a mile before exactly this martyrium. The logic of the scene suggests that the martyrium was the first structure that pilgrims encounter on their way to Abomina after crossing the desert. It seems unlikely that such a shrine would have been in the heart of the desert. The site could not be archaeologically identified yet. It is worth remembering that the road leading through Philoxenita was not the only way to the sanctuary. Visitors from Libya Inferior could travel overland along the Mediterranean coast and then bear south toward the road leading to the sanctuary. Such a road might be recorded in a narrative preserved in the Encomium. I quote, "And leaving Alexandria, they put the saint on a ship of Lake Maria. They came westward on that day to the Taposira Ctenia. They put him on a camel and brought him first to Cobio, a village of Mariotis. And when, by the grace of God and his holy martyr, they defeated the barbarians, they brought his holy remains to the village of Este." end quote. The account looks like a list of stations on a pilgrimage road going from Alexandria to Taposiris Magna and along the western shore of the Mareotis Lake through some small locations to Abu Mina. So from Alexandria to Taposiris and probably around the lake from the west and then south. A pilgrimage station in Libya on a road to Abu Mina is also recorded in the miracle dealing with an unjust rich man who did not offer what he had been promised for the agape organized in the sanctuary. And as a result of miraculous intervention, meat was turned into stone. In the epilogue of the narrative, we can read, I quote, "And the meat which had turned to stone and the pens which had become wood have remained in Libya to this day, to be seen by all who came to the shrine of Apamena," end quote. We also know that the road along the south coast lake of Mareotis was in use, and it may have been taken by people living in the eastern regions and also perhaps in the western delta, so away from here. Finally, let us not forget about desert crossing travelers. Abu Mina and Kelia were important points where desert trails, busy and frequented in late antiquity, converged. So, desert road from Kelia to Abu Mina. The journey across the lake from Alexandria usually took a day, although our sources do not state that this expresses verbis. Miracula, however, mention that they need to spend the night in or near Philoxenite, shopping for food at the market and about meals. The lower or higher water level, depending on the water level in the Nile, also influenced the speed of the journey. For the last part of the trip, which led across the desert, some, perhaps most of pilgrims hired donkeys, the most popular animals for short roads. Camels and horses may have also been in use. Although the miracles do not tell us about this, we are entitled to guess that hiring animals was also dictated by the need to carry luggage, mats, blankets, mattresses, kitchen utensils. Even those who used the well-furnished xenodochia of Abu Mina had to take those. The luggage must have surely included vessels for water. If donkeys were hired for mounting to, crossing the desert required a good hour. A hiking trip lasted longer, several hours, and if it took place during the hot months, it was highly burdensome. A site, or even sites, supplied with water was arranged for travelers in the desert. Archaeologists did not find any traces of enclosures for pack animals in Philoxenite. Neither can they be seen in Abu Mina, but there is no doubt, in our opinion, that such structures must have existed at these locations. And now part about the characteristic of the pilgrims, probably the most extensive one. According to literary conventions of the genre, various personages appear among the pilgrims. The miracles mention the Isaurian, a merchant arriving to Alexandria and heading for Abu Mina on this occasion. We also have a heathen and a Jewish merchant, a figure surprisingly likable and righteous. Another Jew pleading for the healing of a possessed son, and a Samaritan woman from a good family. Both the Jew and the Samaritan woman were Alexandrians. Jews are very often the heroes of miracula. If they deserved a miracle or were its beneficiaries, they converted to Christianity. Besides them, there is also a Libyan and a resident of the nearby Marmarike. It is worth comparing the information about the people arriving in Abu Mina provided by the miracles and ampules, about which in a moment, with information about the clientele of another sub-Alexandrian sanctuary, that of Saints Cyrus and John. The miracles by Sophronius described 69 cases involving 35 Alexandrians, 7 foreigners arriving from outside Egypt, 15 Egyptians and Libyans, that means inhabitants of Mariotis. Only one sick man came from the Antinoe. The rest are inhabitants of the Delta. The comparison shows that both sanctuaries, St. Mina's and St. Cyrus and John, are absent from the pastoral practice of the Christians in Middle and Upper Egypt. This is an extremely important phenomenon, which is not easy to explain. Wealthy people are relatively numerous. An owner of a mare, a wealthy man from Alexandria, a rich woman of Philoxenita, a rich Samaritan woman, a rich man of Libya offering pigs and calves for Agape, a soldier with camels, a merchant arriving to Alexandria and offering expensive timber to the sanctuary. This category of persons, if not burdened with visible sins, always brought glory to the local Christian communities, and for this reason, they were written about with emphasis. We wonder, however, whether their appearance in large numbers, relatively to all characters in the miracles, does not match the reality to some extent. The journey to the sanctuary was expensive. It was necessary to pay for accommodation, offer a customary gift to the sanctuary, with failure to do so being supposed to fill the worshippers with hot shame and a certain amount of doubt as to the expected effect of their act of cult. On the other hand, the poor rarely appear. One of them is a modest brickmaker from Alexandria who is struggling to support a family constantly threatened by hunger. He belongs to a team of craftsmen called to build a church in Abu Mina, which explains his presence in the sanctuary. Someone like that, pious, humble, silent, and yet distinguished by the saint in a collection of miracles, is in his right place. Undoubtedly, the poor appeared in Abu Mina during the holidays in great numbers, and the group also resided there permanently, being able to use the infrastructure, providing assistance and occasional acts of pious distribution made by the rich pilgrims. The miracle, whose heroine is a rich woman from Philoxenita, attacked in the desert by a soldier from a horse unit tasked with guarding the safety of the area, is worth commenting on. It was necessary for the creators of the miracles because it gave the opportunity to present the intervention of the saint in defense of an innocent woman when the victim could not count on anyone's help. The author and listeners did not mind that the presented situation was completely fictional. Women, especially rich ones, who therefore had servants, did not risk a lonely walk through the desert in ancient times. The possibility of being raped was high. The second feminine miracle is already closer to the realities of that world. The Samaritan woman, begging St. Mina's for healing her unbearable headache, travels by ship across the lake with Christian friends and makes the final overland leg of the journey with them. In the Greek and Coptic miracles of St. Mina's, there are no mentions of women asking the saint for the childbirth. Moreover, the rich woman of Philoxenita is introduced as sterile, but she arrived in Abu Mina not to pray for children. And in fact, this theme has no continuation in Greek and Coptic miracles. Later, at least past part of the audience was confused by such a solution, and Arabic recension had her give birth to a child. Abu Mina certainly did not lack such women, and it is proved by clay figurines of pregnant women found in this area. Obviously, the miracles of St. Mina's form a modest collection, but even so, it is odd that it does not mention women who owe their progeny to the saint. It tells us something about the attributes ascribed to the saint. He was primarily the avenger of harms, saving the lives of people in distress. Among the people depicted in the miracles, the inhabitants of the immediate vicinity are virtually never mentioned. Yet, they undoubtedly participated in the ceremonies in Abu Mina, perhaps even constituting the majority of the visitors. Marotis was densely populated and affluent, and its inhabitants did not remain indifferent to the cult of the famous saint. Let us repeat that the inhabitants of Mareotis did not have to reach Abu Mina following the road from Philoxenite, but by overland roads along the lake. It is impossible to determine how numerous the crowd of visitors in Abu Mina was. Literary sources usually overestimate the number of visitors. A certain approximation, but not numbers, is possible, but the assessment by the assessment of the town itself, especially in the section dedicated to satisfying the needs of the guests from beyond the sphere of worship. The number and the area of xenodochia, shops along the main street, bathhouses. The infrastructure could be used by hundreds of people at the same time, but could it be thousands? We can hardly imagine thousands of people arriving at the same time by hundreds of barges to Philoxenite or heading for Abu Mina by overland roads. What was the confession of the visitors of Abu Mina? Chalcedonians or anti-Chalcedonians? In the miracles, there never appeared any information about the dogmatic preferences of Christians who deserved to be subjects of the miraculous interventions of the saint. This is so, despite the fact that Abu Mina evolved and functioned at a time when Christological disputes escalated with great intensity. We should take their silence seriously and accept that the visitors of Abu Mina represented different fractions, and the clergy who welcomed them in the sanctuary made no distinction between Chalcedonians and anti-Chalcedonians. Indeed, this is comprehensible. That the clergy was substantially interested in the fact that the number of people coming was as large as possible, not only for economic reasons, but also for religious ones. Pilgrimage sanctuaries were usually open to people of different factions as well as different religions. The religious consciousness of ordinary people makes them consider saints as being beyond divisions, even though the representatives of doctrinal fractions tried to impose a different belief upon them. And now the last section about the ampules and the pilgrims. In addition to literary compositions, the second category of sources informing us about visitors to Abu Mina are the so-called ampules of St. Minas, small, oval, and flat flasks with handles, through which string or thong could be threaded to wear them around the neck. They were produced in Abu Mina workshops from the local clay, and they were decorated with the image of St. Minas, generally, less frequently with the images of other saints. Many of them have inscriptions in Greek, eulogia to Hagiumena. Not all researchers agree on the substances, on the substance they contain, water or rather oil. The oil came from the lamps burning in front of the tomb of St. Minas, in accordance with the well-documented customs of pilgrimage centers. We know nothing about the way the guests of the sanctuary came into the possession of ampules. Did they receive them with its sacred content from the sanctuary's staff at the time when they publicly donated a gift to the clergy of the sanctuary? Did they purchase them as a price determined by the potter and ask the sanctuary staff for oil of water or water? The differences in dimension, the height between 7,5 and 27 centimeters, and decor suggest the existence of the ampules for richer or more important buyers who wanted the vessel to contain enough fluid, the carrier of miraculous power. The visitors of Abu Mina carried out the ampules and occasionally took them far away to various lands located around the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea, and the Red Sea. We find them in many museum collections from North Africa and the Red Sea coast to European cities outside the arc of the Alps. It was these ampules that formed the basis for the hypothesis about the existence of a pilgrimage movement of unusual scale for late antiquity. The sobering up proceeded slowly. At the Congress of Christian Archaeology held in Bonn in 1991, scholars showed that the number of places where ampules were supposed to be found was overestimated. Having checked their provenance in many museum collections, they found that a large part of the objects had undoubtedly a correct entry in the inventory, origin Egypt, but they lacked information on where they were found in their second homeland and in what context. Meanwhile, only those that were dug out from the ground, preferably during excavations, could bear a testimony to their dissemination in antiquity. During the first excavations at Abu Mina, conducted by the sanctuary discoverer Karl Maria Kaufmann in the early 20th century, a huge number of ampules were found in situ, even in pottery kilns. Some of them were exported to Alexandria, where antiquarians and even merchants sold them in the markets for a small amount of money. Tourists interested in collecting antiquities carried them away, and then it happened that they donated their collections to a museum. Museums also bought ampules on the antiquarian market. Due to the carefree record keeping, checking the provenance of many ampules turned out to be impossible. Under the influence of criticism at the above-mentioned Congress, almost all items had to be removed from the lists of ampules found behind the Ark of the Alps. Subsequent publications respected the requirements of checking the provenance of the ampules. Nevertheless, it was possible to verify that there were indeed ampules discovered even in Britain in the ground. At this moment, it's important to give one more comment about the non-Egyptian fate of the ampules. We have every reason to believe that the ampules may have changed their owners through gifts and purchases. Therefore, we cannot always be sure that upon finding in the ground an ampule at a specific locality, the person who visited the sanctuary came exactly from that place. The ampules found in Egypt, except of Abu Mina, of course, must be treated separately. 20 of them were discovered in Philoxenita. Many ampules were found in Alexandria. 142 ampules were excavated at Kom el-Dikka in the pottery-dated layers, which allowed for determining the date of creation for these artifacts, as they do not make dating possible on their own. Alexandrian ampules were mostly brought from Abu Mina by the Alexandrians and stored in their homes. Perhaps the representatives of the shrine sold ampules in Alexandria to people who were unable to travel. Did such ampules acquired with money have the same religious effectiveness as those acquired during visits to the shrine? Such a question cannot be reliably answered, but it's still worth asking. The most astonishing, however, is the list of ampules from Hora, very short, with ampules as suspicious as those in European museums, because they could have reached the cities of Middle and Upper Egypt thanks to travelers in the 19th and 20th century. In the southernmost part of the Delta, one ampule was found in Naucratis, as well as one in Kelia. The catalogue prepared by Lambert e Pedemonte de Melio include the following monuments from Thebite. Antinoe, 2, there is no data about their provenance, and Edfu, 2 items, also nothing known about provenance. It is highly certain that Lambert's list, compiled over 30 years ago, is incomplete, as the items published in local journals, which are difficult to find in libraries, escaped her attention. It should also be considered that the vessels preserved in fragments and discovered during excavations and surface research have not been identified. However, even if we extend the list of Egyptian ampules, it ought to be concluded that Egyptians, in the sense of the inhabitants of the Kora, were very rarely guests of Abu Mina. This fact is all the more unexpected, considering that the cult of St. Minas enjoyed popularity from the 6th century on. It is enough to check the data on it compiled by Arietta Papakonstantinou, based on papyrus documents and inscriptions, the best source material for the study of the cult of saints. The oldest document quoted by her comes from 535. The cult must have spread through literature, the living presence in the place of its relics was of no importance to this process. It is astonishing, after all, the inhabitants of the Chora came to Alexandria in large numbers. Clergy and monks traveled there, while in monastic centers such as Saqqara, Bawit, monasteries of the Shenutian Federation, Western Thebes, and Esna, no ampules were found. And a short summary. According to literary sources and the discovery of ampules, the sanctuary in Abu Mina attracted pilgrims mainly from the nearby area, Mareotis, Libya Inferior, and Alexandria. It seems that the Egyptian from the Delta and the Nile Valley appeared relatively rarely. Philoxenita was a hub port for traffic from the direction of Alexandria. This is important as overseas pilgrims had to reach Abu Mina via Alexandria, and therefore also via Philoxenita. Undoubtedly, most of goods, especially construction material, reached the sanctuary along this road as well. It should be noted that it was also a transit point for the Patriarch and his staff during regular visits to Abu Mina. Most of these guests must have spent at least one night in Philoxenita. Due to the rank of these visitors, as well as the relative wealth of many of them, the city had to provide adequate infrastructure. It seems that literary sources and ampules tell us directly, it seems that everything that literary sources and ampules tell us directly, or what can be indirectly deduced from them, is confirmed by archaeological material, which will be broadly presented in the later part of the session. Thank you very much.